in your opinion, what was the most predominating impact that the Santa Fe Trail produced?
Well, the Santa Fe Trail has several major impacts. It was the first international commercial trail for the United States, because the United States went to the Missouri border, and that was it. And from there on, it was Mexican territory. And so, you know, with the trade that began in 1821, William Becknell took his first horses with some pack horses down to Santa Fe to do trading and made it back safely. That was the beginning of the Santa Fe Trail. There had been several other people earlier than that, mainly mountain men and entrepreneurs, that sort of thing, that had tried to do it and got captured by the Spanish and ended up in Mexico City in prison for quite some time. And so even though they tried to get some trade going, it never succeeded. William Becknell's did, because he made it all the way down and came back. And when he came back to Franklin, Missouri, and the story goes that he dumped all the silver that he'd gotten from his trade in Mexico and dumped it in the gutters of Franklin. Except at that time, Franklin actually didn't have stone gutters. Arrow Rock today does, but Franklin didn't. But anyway, that was the story. And so that got everybody excited about loading up wagons and trying to head down. When they would cross and go into Mexican territory, for the first several years, they had no military protection, but they were doing enormous business with the people in Santa Fe, because the people in Santa Fe were very poor Mexicans that had no ability to manufacture goods, sort of. You know, they just lived on their gardens and furs that they could get. You know, it was just a basic Indian village. The Spanish kept it very secure. They didn't want any Americans coming down in there because of the Spanish. It's actually Spanish territory, because the Mexican War hadn't begun yet, so it was Spanish territory. They didn't want Americans coming down there. And they would bring up wagon loads of stuff from the Isthmus of the Yucatan Peninsula. Their boats from Spain would land there, and then they would travel 3,000 miles to get up to Santa Fe, and they didn't come very often. So there was no manufactured goods, anything like that they could get. So when he went, it made a major impact, because those people were so excited to get something, and they paid with silver. And at that time, the United States was in a sort of a Great Depression. And so the financial impact on the whole United States was something, because they'd bring all that silver back and start, you know, they would purchase things. And of course, he was beginning to purchase things other than stuff made in Missouri. He was getting it from other places too. And all the traders began then to follow suit to make money. And so it was a big commercial impact. Now, as far as the Indians go, if you talk about the Mexican people that lived in Santa Fe, of course, it was a big impact on them economically too, to get all of this stuff. And eventually, America took over had the Mexican War and claimed Mexico or New Mexico and California and Arizona and all of that, you know, with the Mexican-American War. But the Indians along the trail did a lot of trading. There were some forts developed. A trading post had been there for years, Bent's Fort, out in the southern part, close to Pueblo, Colorado. And it had been built as a trading post. The fur trappers would bring in the furs, because beaver was the big thing, not only in New York and that area, but in Europe. They made all sorts of hats and stuff out of beaver. And it was a very important economic aspect of it. And so Bent's Fort, the man, you've probably talked about William Bent in some of your readings, you've heard of him. And he was married to one of the Indian women, I think Cherokee, but I'm not sure, you better check on that. But the Indians would come into that area and camp, and do their trading and getting supplies from Ben's Fort. And so the Santa Fe Trail would go through Ben's Fort area, drop things off too, and do trading. And so that's how they got more and more materials. Eventually, Bent blew up his own fort because the Army wanted it during the Mexican-American War, and he wouldn't give it to the Army, so he blew it up. Today, there's a reproduction of it that the National Park has made. The Indians also, a lot of the fur trappers would join Indian tribes and do a lot of their fur trapping. Eventually, the Santa Fe, I think it was just called Santa Fe beaver, that was the most outstanding fur pelt and that sort of thing. Eventually, they wiped them out. They just trapped too many of them, and there weren't any more. But that was the big one for economic purposes of sending back and forth. In addition to the silver. The silver was a big thing, because that was I don't know if they called it a recession, but it was 1819. And Mexico finally became a state Missouri became a state in 1821. But this big depression across the whole United States had occurred beginning about 1819. And with William Bent going out to do his trading and bringing back all that silver, it really saved the Missouri area people, because they had so much money coming in and out with the trade, and lots of traders. Big caravans of traders would go out after that. I suppose the impact on the Indian population would be, one, spreading diseases, coming from people from a different culture coming in, and of course the wiping out of the beavers, and just the contact. And when they started the forts, that kind of led to the Indians being able to come into the forts, like the one that's at Fort Osage, which is probably the first fort on that trail. It was used as a trading post, a factory they called it, and the Indians could come in there and get, I think at one time they were giving them some kind of money too, I'm not sure what that was, but they could come in there and they could do some trading. And so the forts that were set up along the way. And the U.S. military set up forts because the traders were being attacked by Indians quite often, and some renegade people from Texas killed a lot of the traders along the trail. And so forts just kept developing all the way along the trail. So you had Leavenworth, which was a military post that was set up by the United States government, and they helped protect some of the traders. And then moving on, you had Fort Larned and Fort Dodge and those. The conflict between the Mexican government and the United States government really began before the Mexican-American War. And so the United States government could protect the traders all the way to what is now Dodge City. But if you looked across the river at Dodge City, you hit Mexico. And so the soldiers were not supposed to cross that river. And one time, a group of traders crossed the river and were headed on to Santa Fe, and they got attacked by Indians. And so they sent somebody back to ask the soldiers to help, and the soldiers illegally crossed into Mexico and went down and helped and got them back. But I don't know, you have to look for how many, hundreds of thousands of dollars of trade went back and forth. So it was a big impact with the silver, economic impact with the silver and all the trade that was going on. And then, no doubt, it was really influential in a negative way against the Indians, because, the forts were coming in, they were beginning to move Indians out and that sort of thing. So there'd be there were a lot of attacks and that, but I think the biggest impact would probably be the economic. And the political became really important because of Congress having to pass laws to get forts built, and because Missouri then eventually became a state, and all along the trail there was states that began to develop after Missouri had developed because of people, going back and forth. The Mexican traders from Santa Fe area, the very rich Mexicans, they would trade and come this way. And so they were bringing a lot of Mexican goods too up to the United States. And they were so wealthy that they would bring their children. And then they would load the children onto ships and send them back east to go to school. And so they'd go to a boarding school in New York or Pennsylvania or wherever and be educated that way. And a lot of those important Mexican traders became government leaders in Mexico. One was killed. He was attacked by some people from Texas and killed, and he was one of the most important, I can't think of his name right now, but he was one of the most important ones. And they attacked him when he was trying to get back to Missouri to trade in his goods. He sold everything and all the money that he had. But the trade was not just what you would think of as American goods, because they could bring things into New Orleans and things that had been purchased in Europe and Asia. There was all sorts of stuff coming in for this big trade commerce that had developed, and it would come to New Orleans and then take a steamboat. Once they had the steamboats that were working, they'd take a steamboat up to Franklin and drop them off, and then the steamboats kept moving farther and farther, and Kansas City became a big dropping off point where they'd drop off all the goods. So millions of dollars of goods, and not just American goods, but from China, from France, Germany, all over. We're going down to Santa Fe.
Thank you.